What is your opinion when people say that people who are gay or lesbian have a chemical imbalance and are born like that?
Look, for what it's worth, I think it's reasonably clear that a person's makeup in their desires, including LGBT, is probably a fairly complicated mix of nature and nurture. I think, yeah, people could have a genetic predisposition in some sense. I also think that people obviously are profoundly shaped and affected by their environment. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, particularly in the LGBT community. There is, I think, a complex thing going on there. Probably there's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. But it's the same for all of us. We all have a sinful nature. We're born that way, in a sense. I don't have a problem with homosexuality, but I'm a man, and there's sexual desire for every person. But of course, we're called to submit our sexual desires, we're called to submit our passions and our feelings to God's will. That's not a gay thing, that's not a straight thing, that's a person thing. And actually what God has said to us is, there is a particular place and design for that, and that's it. End of story. And so that's what we honour and that's what we live for. And we will find in this culture that is probably the most demented and insane thing to believe. And that is why, and it really is, I mean, it's incomprehensible to the broader culture at large. But it probably is one of the practices in the Christian church, as was the case in the early church in Rome, that actually is most attractive. The early church, women flocked to the early church because they were treated with dignity, because there was sexual control and restraint. People who are not practicing these sins actually become very attractive people to the world of hurting individuals who have been harmed by these things, who have been hurt by these things, who have been ravaged by these things. And they look on at this community that is pure. And it's a marvellous and a tremendous thing. And I think it's really only by the power of God in an age like this that can happen. But if we can be those people, I think the church will again become, and is indeed becoming, a great magnet for the sexually broken and the people who are at their lowest of the low because of the abuses that this life can wreak upon them. One area I see that already is in the area of transgender regret. It's really interesting to me that all the transgender regretters that I meet, who have gone down the pathway of becoming a trans woman or a trans man, regretted it, face the awful reality of that, and it truly is awful. It's interesting, they're all Christians. They all come to Christ. They all come to the church. All the ones I've met, now they aren't all, but all the ones I've met are. It's an unbelievable mission field, if you like, if I could put it that way, where people find restoration and healing from what is one of the most dastardly things that can be done to a person. And so I think that's a real burden on the church for us to live up to that standard, because I think it is in that testimony and witness in a effectively pagan world that God can really work.